Let's start by exploring the Xcode interface. Now over here we have the welcome prompt for Xcode, and you can see information such as the version number, which is currently 11.2. On the right-hand side are your most recently opened projects. If you don't like seeing the welcome prompt for whatever reason, you can check this box to not show this window when Xcode launches, but I like to leave it on. Now there's two ways to start an Xcode project. The first being on the left-hand side of the welcome prompt, you can select Create a new Xcode project. Or option number 2 is to go to File, New, and Project. And that also allows you to create a new Xcode project. I'm going to click on this item right here to create a new Xcode project. And here comes the Startup Wizard. On the top, you can see a tab that allows you to choose which operating system you're building your app for. It's very important to choose iOS. You have many options to choose from, for example, WatchOS, tvOS, or even cross-platform if you're building a game that can be played across macOS as well as iOS. Now we're just going to focus our attention on iOS. And even within iOS, there's just a ton of different templates for you to use. Now for me, 100% of the time, I would choose the most basic template so I can build from scratch and really understand what I'm building and not have Xcode write the code for me. So I'll choose Single View App, which is the most basic template you can choose. Make sure when you're choosing Single View App, it's very important that you're highlighting the iOS tab. Sometimes students mistakenly select macOS and just see app and think that's the template for an iOS app. When you hit next, you're given another prompt, which allows you to enter basic information about your app. The first text field here is product name, which is the name of your app. I'm going to type my first app right here. Second item is team. So if you work for a company that is registered as an Apple developer, you would be giving credentials for a team that you can link up over here. Moving on to the third prompt is the organization name. This is essentially the name of your company, or it can be your own name if you're developing this by yourself. The fourth prompt is the organization identifier. So what developers typically put here is what we call the reverse domain name of their organization. So for example, the name of my organization can be madesimple.tv. And the convention here is to reverse that domain name. So instead of madesimple.tv, we would put tv.madesimple. Another example is, let's say, mystore.com. Instead of having mystore.com, you would reverse it to be com.mystore. So this is a reverse domain name approach. Why is the standard reverse domain name instead of a regular domain name? I'm not sure. I wasn't in that meeting when they made that decision, and I didn't have a say in it, but this is a very standard convention that everybody uses. Next up, we have the bundle identifier. Xcode just takes your organization ID and add it to your product name, and that is your bundle identifier. It's important to note that every app in the App Store has a unique bundle identifier. Now for language, we have two choices. We can choose Swift or Objective-C. Since Objective-C is slowly dying off, we'll stick to Swift. And for user interface, we have Storyboard or the newly introduced Swift UI. Now we are going to stick with Storyboard. And finally, there are 3 checkboxes for core data, unit tests, and UI tests. And we'll leave them all unchecked for now. It's important to note that anything you set here can be changed later on, and you're not locked into anything. So if tomorrow you decide to change the programming language or your app name, it's completely okay. Let's click on Next. Now on my Mac, I typically create a playground folder where I save all my projects in. You can create the same if you like. If you don't have that folder, there's a new folder option right here on the bottom left. Alright, now let's click on Create. Here we have up and running our first Xcode project. And yes, there are a lot of buttons and controls. This brings back memories of when I first started to learn a program like Photoshop. There was just a ton of buttons and it was pretty overwhelming. But don't worry, we'll walk through Xcode together and understand it step by step. Now, the best way to learn an IDE such as Xcode is not to start off by pinpointing every single button and control, but rather to take a few steps back and get an overview of the landscape of things. So let's do just that. Let's start off by breaking down the major panels of the Xcode interface. Over here, I have a diagram that shows the major panels of Xcode, and let's go through them one by one. On the left-hand side, you have what we call the Navigator area. This is the place where you will look for all of the files that your app is made of. All your source code, all your user interface files are displayed right here on the left-hand side. Over on the top, you have the toolbar. The toolbar is a place where you basically run your app. You can select what simulator to use and get a status update from Xcode on what it's doing when it's building your app. On the right-hand side, you have the utility area, which is a context-specific panel. Depending on what you've selected, whether it's a source code file or an interface file, this utility area will change, and it will allow you to configure the objects that you've selected. Finally, in the center, we have the editor area. This is the main canvas and the center of attention. This is where we would spend most of our time editing code or user interface elements. You know, there's a lot of buttons and a lot of controls, but if you understand the general areas and their responsibilities, this would really help you navigate through Xcode. So basically, if you want to browse files, go to the Navigator panel on the left. If you want to run your app, go to the toolbar on the top. If you want to edit a file or object, go to the Utilities panel on the right. And if you want to code all day, go to the editor area in the center. Now let's jump back into Xcode so we can briefly navigate through the interface. Right here, you can see our Navigator panel. These are all the files that our app is made out of. Let's say we're in a situation where I have a lot of files, and I want to quickly find a file called appdelegate.swift. Luckily for us, over here on the bottom left, there's a filter where I can just type appdelegate, and it would autocomplete in real time and just filter out the files with that term. This can be a lifesaver when you have a ton of files in your app. Moving on to the middle, you can see the center of attention, which is our main canvas, where we would write our source code and also where we would view and edit our user interface elements. As of Xcode 11, there's a new feature called Minimap, which allows us to see a mini view of our source code on the right-hand side. Here you can see our code editor in action, where it color codes different parts of our source code. So that's really neat. And on the right-hand side is the utility area, where depending on what I select, it's going to be a different set of controls. If I select on the main storyboard, you can see that the utility area changes. It's the only panel that is context-specific. Depending on what you select and focus on, it's going to change. And on the top, we can see a play button where we can actually build and run our app. On the middle, you can see a progress bar. Right now, nothing's going on because we're not running our app. On the right-hand side, we have 3 buttons that allows us to hide or show our panels. So for example, let's say I'm in the zone and I really want to focus on writing code. I can hide the panels on the left, hide the panels on the right, and toggle the panels as I see fit, and focus on the content that matters to me. So that's a brief overview of the Xcode interface. Now remember, don't stress out about understanding every single button. If you focus on the general areas and their responsibilities, that would help you out a lot. In the next section, we're going to start running our app on the simulator, as well as a physical iOS device. It's going to be really fun, so I'll see you there.